South African travellers face major restrictions in over 120 countries. It's mainly because of the COVID-19 variant first discovered in the country. But how will this affect business, especially with our SADC countries? Joining us to unpack this is aviation expert and editor of Flyer SA magazine, Guy Leach. Guy, as always, thanks for your time and speaking to us. So we're talking about those plus 120 countries that have severe restrictions on travel from South Africa. What role did the discovery of that 501YV2 variant of COVID-19 here in South Africa have on travel restrictions? Did we see them spike at that time?
Yeah, hi, nice to be with you. Well, the tragedy, of course, is that it's more in the stigma attached to having a variety or variant of the disease named after you than the actual numbers. The disease or the variant didn't actually, of course, come from South Africa. It just happened to be identified in South Africa and rather informally got the name the South African variant. The actual rate of infection in South Africa is only relatively average in terms of world incidences. But, of course, it doesn't help that the third wave is looming, the second wave is pretty much come and gone, and we weren't remotely ready for it in terms of vaccine rollout. So South Africa is definitely way behind the rest of the world in terms of vaccine rollout. And it's no surprise at all that IATA describes us as being now one of the worst red flag countries in terms of international travel. The implication is huge. Look, it's obviously more significant that travellers don't like to come to South Africa because that means that our tourism industry, which has become the lifeblood of much of South Africa's economy, and particularly the small-scale enterprise side of things, is still on its knees 15 months after the start of the COVID pandemic. It's still really struggling to recover, as is our airline industry. So it's a great tragedy, and it's a huge, the damage reckoned caused to our tourism and broader industry cannot be underestimated by the fact that we are still so severely categorized as a bad country by the rest of the world.
African countries have implemented moderate travel restrictions. How's this impacting business relations between ourselves and our African neighbours?
It depends on what you mean by moderate travel restrictions. IATA again has pointed out that the temptation of countries to create a quarantine environment absolutely stops traffic dead. Almost nobody will travel if they're faced with any form of quarantine, particularly at their own expense at the other end. And we've seen draconian quarantine requirements being put in places by many European countries, most of them requiring at least a week in hotels for the traveller's own expense. So it's really desperate if travellers wish to or have to travel and then face a quarantine requirement like this. The actual standards or the requirements vary across the continent of Africa. We're seeing different countries requiring completely different standards, which is one of the reasons why the World Travel Pass has been rolled out. Hopefully South Africa will get to it eventually, slowly again as well. The World Travel Pass is essentially a digital vaccination certificate, which shows not necessarily when you are vaccinated. That is not a requirement to travel and is unlikely ever to be. But what is important is when you last presented with a clear COVID test, and what your exposure has been as well. So obviously if you can present with a clear COVID test, low exposure, and a vaccination certificate, then it should make travel much better, much easier, but it's going to take a little while before all the countries around the world adopt a single travel clearance certificate. We've seen reports already around Africa that fake vaccination certificates have been presented already. We need to get past that quickly if air travel is going to begin to return to normal.
Thank you very much. That was the editor of Flyer SA magazine, Guy Leach.